on the landmark case of the Latino Action Network versus New Jersey, a case that focuses on desegregating New Jersey schools, despite the history of other cases that have existed. So I'm just going to provide a brief introduction. It's been almost 70 years since Brown versus Board was passed and the fight to end segregation in schools. And we'd like to welcome you all to this monumental discussion because this discussion is about the next milestone that gets us closer to integration and educational equity. Unfortunately, we still talk about segregation as a thing of the past, but this landmark case has really brought it to light that this is not an issue of the past and that we have a unique opportunity right now to intervene. And that's what today's discussion is about potential remedies. The Latino Action Network Foundation, along with Salvation and Social Justice, the Newark Cornwall Center, the NAACP, the Urban League, and several other community organizations and groups throughout the state have spent the last 4 years engaging in intense community outreach and education to raise awareness about this landmark case. Now, from my particular end at the foundation and with LAN, the conversations that we've had along with SNSJ that had been focused on youth and students about the negative impact of school segregation on their everyday lives, it was not confusing at all. It was like clearly bad. They feel the impact of lacking resources, the learning gaps, the disparities, the discipline disparities, and they're on board to end it. Most of the resistance that we've experienced in addressing this issue has been from adults, which is not surprising. I'm looking forward to today's discussion because I think that it's important that we work towards overcoming fear-based thinking so that we can truly meet the call to action so desperately needed by our students today. So today's discussion is about the potential remedies that will be able to keep up with the urgency of the moment so that it has an ongoing impact and not just one kind of move, that it can address issues over time. And I'm really looking forward, especially with all the voices of the students that we've been working with over the years, about how our esteemed panelists can guide us in a way to be able to get this done, whatever it is, as soon as possible, because that's really what the call to action is. I'm going to share real quickly on my screen for those who may, can I get access to sharing?
Yes.
Not familiar with the case, you can visit several websites to get information about the case. I'll actually put the LAN Foundation website with the case page in the link, and I'm just going to share a list of the districts most impacted by this case, cited in the case. I don't know if it's everywhere. So I'll need help putting it for everyone because I can only chat to hosts and panelists. You can help me. So these are the communities that were identified in the lawsuit as being most impacted by segregation. Districts from Camden, Essex, Hudson, Mercer, Middlesex, Monmouth, Passaic, and Union. And for those who have not read in depth of 100 pages of each case and the decision, it really just boils down to, and we'll hear it in the stories of youth over and over and over again, that the majority of Black and Latino students are attending schools that are 90% non-white, that the funding resources are not equitable, that time and again, Black and Latino students are more likely to go through the school to prison pipeline than the higher education route and be less likely to be prepared for higher education. And this is starting as young as, it's no longer just kindergarten and up, but 0 and up. The trajectory, especially in these districts, is very poor. So with that said, I'd like to hand over and introduce the lawyers who have been working on this case and have a long history working on the legal aspects of this case. First, I'd like to introduce attorney Lawrence Lusberg. He is the recipient of the 2023 Medal of Honor from the New Jersey State Bar Foundation. He's also one of the lead attorneys on the school segregation case. Larry, do you want to just wait? Okay. I'd like to introduce Michael Stein. He is a managing partner at Pashman and Stein, recently named the 2023 Law Firm of the Year by the New Jersey Law Journal, and also a co-lawyer on this case, right? Great. And last but not least, attorney Robert Kim, who is with the Education Law Center, right? Am I correct on this? Not, I don't have the short bio for you. Good thing. Yeah, but I know your name. So I'd like to open up the floor. Each speaker has 7 minutes to discuss, and I'd like to start with Larry.
Thanks so much, Jessie, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's our goal today to hear from all of you with regard to your sense of the appropriate remedies. But I've been asked to essentially talk about how we got to where we are at this point, and you've all read that we're in the midst of mediation, and to explain what that means and how we got there. I assume that many of you may have seen or at least heard of the trial court's decision of October 6th that was based on our motion for what's called summary judgment in the case. We were attempting to get a judgment saying that the state should be liable for the segregated schools that are among the worst in the nation. The court did not grant our motion for summary judgment. And after a very long period of waiting for the decision, it did, however, say some very important things that provide important background, in my view, to the mediation process that we're involved in today. Just by way of a couple of facts, at the state level, throughout the entire state of New Jersey, 49.2% of all Black students and 46.6% of all Latino students attend schools that are 90% or more non-white. About 2/3 of Black students and 60% of Latino students attend schools that are 80% or more non-white. That makes New Jersey as progressive a state as we believe we are. It makes New Jersey stand out as among the most segregated, having among the most segregated school systems in our entire nation. And that's why Mike Stein and I, and now Bob Kim has joined us, feel so strongly about this matter. We filed the case in May 2018 on the 64th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. We filed our motion for judgment, as I mentioned before, in January, was completely filed by January 2022, when we argued it in March of 2022, but we didn't get a decision until 19 months later in October. The decision had some extraordinary passages. It found marked and persistent racial imbalance in numerous school districts across the state, that the defendants' actions, policies, programs, and inaction had failed to remedy. It found the state's arguments to be of little evidential or persuasive value. It found the state's reading of our Constitution, which prohibits de facto segregation, to be, quote, cramped and confined. It found that the state's factual and legal criticisms of our arguments were neither persuasive nor robust, and did not persuade the court that plaintiffs' claims were flawed. It said that the state's position rang of an attitude of helplessness in the face of what was perceived to be inevitable. And maybe what's most important in a state like ours, which values home rule, it said home rule and neighborhood schools impose no obstacle and do not dilute or diminish the state's obligation to fight segregation in public schools. In the wake of that decision, the state of New Jersey approached us and asked us to engage in a mediation process, and I want to praise the state for doing so. It was courageous, it was appropriate, and we're excited to engage in that mediation process. I've been asked to describe to you very briefly what mediation means. What it means is that we have a mediator. In this case, the mediator is former New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Barry Albin. Poetically, Justice Albin actually succeeded Justice Stein in that seat on the Supreme Court, which is a pretty extraordinary thing. But Justice Albin is a leading progressive voice. Has great energy and tremendous commitment to trying to find solutions here, as we've already learned. The mediation process that was laid out by the court was one that essentially put on hold, the words were held in abeyance, our right to appeal from the trial court's decision. Now, given everything I've said, why would we want to appeal? We'd want to appeal because, where there's a right, there's a remedy. And we felt very strongly that with all of what the court said, it should have granted judgment for us. So we were prepared to proceed with that appeal, and we remain prepared to do so. Instead, though, the matter has been placed essentially on hold to give us a chance to try to work this out. And that chance, and the reason we're availing ourselves of that chance, apropos of what Jessely said earlier, is to try to address the situation in this state more quickly than it would be addressed through a litigation process, which, as we all know, can go on for years and years. But the court's order that put that case on hold provided that we have to provide a status report in the middle of December, and that we have to be, and that the case is only held in abeyance until the middle of January, unless we make a motion to extend it. One that would have to be based upon the fact that we're making progress and continuing to proceed in good faith. So that's basically how it works. We meet, we talk to each other, and we try to work out potential remedies. But from my perspective, what those remedies are, while there's history, and I know that Justice Stein will talk about this in other places around the nation, while there's data to help us come up with the right solution, the truth of the matter is that we want to hear from all of you as to what makes sense. And that's the reason that we're here today. Let me just say one other thing, and then I'll be done, which is the mediation process in which we're engaged is one that, by its very nature, has to remain confidential. What's said in the room between us and the state is not something that can be repeated publicly. And the reason for that is so that there can be a frank exchange of ideas. That doesn't mean that the process at the end of the day is going to be secretive, whether there will be reports that will be issued, or whatever the process ends up being. There will be transparency into what we will have done at some point. But while it's ongoing, while we attempt to have candid conversation about potential remedies, which is what we're going to talk about today, we really are not free. And we've assured the other side, and we've assured the mediator, that we would not feel free to betray the trust that everyone has placed in each other, to have these conversations in good faith and attempt to make progress towards remedying this horrific segregation. So let me stop there. I don't know if my co-counsel Mike wants to add anything, but again, I'm excited to be here and to listen to all of you.
I'll just say a couple things, Larry, and then turn it over to you, Bob. And really, it's as a point of emphasis in terms of focusing you all on what is going to happen next in the litigation context and why. And we remain as confident today as we did when we filed the lawsuit that we will ultimately succeed on the merits of this lawsuit. But as someone who litigates for a living, I can tell you something I'm sure you all are aware of. The wheels of justice move so frustratingly slowly. It's taken us 5 years to get to where we are today, and we have so much longer to go in the context of litigation. And I say that as a point of emphasis because that's why we were so excited when the state made its courageous overture. Look, this is a political hot potato. We've been frustrated over the last many years by the pace of the litigation, but we are grateful that the state has approached us. And while we can't talk to you about substance, I can tell you, as somebody who attended the first mediation session, that I left with a sense that the state is engaging in good faith and with a desire to do something, maybe do something unprecedented and historic. And if we succeed in this effort, we're going to be able to see results years, maybe decades sooner than we would in the ordinary course of litigation. And every year of delay is a failure for another class of our state's school children. And so that's why we're here today with a lot of excitement, a lot of optimism, and a lot of real positive energy. And with that, I pass it on to you, Bob, for whatever you want to add.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll be really brief here because I really want to move on to hearing from all of you. But I just wanted to start off by just thanking everybody who has brought us to this day. This is really a historic moment. Larry, Justice Stein, Mike Stein, all the plaintiffs and the stakeholder organizations who helped move this forward. It's just, it really is a historic opportunity to do something groundbreaking in the civil rights arena, the likes of which we haven't seen in any other state in quite a number of years. So I'm really excited and also grateful to all of you for your involvement and bringing us to this moment. I wanted to say that, me personally, I started at ELC as executive director only in March of this year. And the reason why I wanted ELC to be involved in this case, just really briefly, personally, as someone who has been a civil rights lawyer for the last 25 years, we start off with Brown versus Board, as Jessely mentioned at the beginning of the call, but all of civil rights really emanates from Brown versus Board. It is such a seminal case that our entire careers often are built around that case. So it would be an anathema for ELC not to be really, really concerned and invested in the success of this case. It's also, as you know, ELC has been involved because of Abbott. We've been in the Abbott litigation for many, many decades now. But there was a piece of the civil rights puzzle that was missing in New Jersey all along, and that was addressing this issue of school segregation. In other words, it's not just enough for adequate and equitable school funding, it's also about desegregating and integrating schools. So I think this really is historic. In terms of what we might learn from going forward, I think that what we do want to do is what we're doing today, thanks to all of you all, is to engage in outreach to make sure the community is involved and with us as we are in discussions with the state on remedies. We want to make sure that all kids, and uphold the principle that all children benefit from desegregation. It's not just Black and brown kids, but white kids as well benefit from deseg and integration. And we also want to understand that true integration it may, and this is learning from the lessons of the past as well. We know that it's not just about ensuring that students of color and white and Asian children are all in the same classroom in the school, but true integration within schools also means further steps and possibly further remedies to make sure that these school environments and the remedies that are crafted are ones that are good for families, good for students in the experience of attending integrated schools. We know that that's true generally speaking, but in terms of what communities and students are feeling and perceiving, we can learn from the past and build remedies to make sure that all students are supported as they attend these integrated environments. So I really look forward to moving forward with you. I think we all need to be open to a broad range of remedies here. We need to listen to the voices of the community. You are the stewards and leaders of the communities around New Jersey. And so we really need you to speak up and be assertive and as specific as you can around what you think we need to do to achieve true integration in New Jersey schools. So with that, I thank you, and I'll turn it back over to the facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you. Bob Kim, I really appreciate that. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Robert briefly mentioned the Abbott versus Burke case from many years ago. Former Justice Stein, the Justice Honorable Gary Stein, he is an associate justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court and helped shape the Abbott versus Burke litigation. More recently, he has been the president of the New Jersey Coalition for Diverse and Inclusive Schools, which coordinated the filing of the most recent lawsuit. So thank you so much, Gary Stein, for joining us.
Thank you very much. And hi, everybody. This is a very important case to me, and today's a very important day. I grew up in Irvington. I graduated Irvington High School in 1950. And when I was in the Irvington public schools and the high school, they were all white. Today, Irvington is probably 85% African American and 14.5% Latino. I'm embarrassed as a citizen of New Jersey and someone who spent his entire life here that our state is one of the most segregated school systems in the entire country, probably worse than any state in the South. And I started this lawsuit along with Professor Elise Botti, who couldn't be with us today. Elise is a professor of constitutional law at Rutgers, because I felt that unless we filed a lawsuit, school segregation in New Jersey would not change. And so here we are. We've been at it for 5 years. As everybody's told you, the mediation is a significant step forward. And if we're successful in the mediation, we may have a solution to this lawsuit, which will just mark the beginning of years of additional hard work to remedy the segregation that's plagued our state all these years. So I want to talk to you about possible remedies. You know, when the Abbott v. Burke case was in our court, the remedies were pretty clear. The Abbott districts, the poorest districts in the state, were not getting adequate resources from the state. And so our court in 1992 ordered the state to provide funding for every school child in the Abbott districts that was at least equal to the funding provided in the wealthiest suburbs in New Jersey. In addition to that, our court ordered free preschool for every 3- and 4-year-old in New Jersey. And those were direct remedies that we thought would help those districts, and they did. Segregation is more complicated because in order to remedy segregation, children have to go to schools that are different from the ones we're going to. We made a judgment early on in this case, and I hope you all agree with it, that our remedies should be voluntary, not mandatory. No child should be compelled to change schools. On the other hand, we think, because we've talked about this with the leading experts all around the country, that we have a possible list of remedies that will be helpful. And we say that because these are remedies that have worked in other states that had segregated school districts. And we want you to hear about them. We want to answer your questions. And we want to hear if you have any ideas that we have not thought of. So the basic goal of our remedies is to substantially improve educational opportunities for Black and Latino children, and white children as well, and to provide the Black and Latino children who are segregated today in their schools with the option of being segregated in a non-educated, in a non-segregated environment. And there are several ways that we think we can do this, and let me outline them very briefly for you. And each of these remedies is intended to provide better educational opportunities with the voluntary option of having that opportunity in a non-segregated district. Magnet schools, number one. Magnet schools with themes such as music and art, aerospace and engineering, international studies, healthcare. Magnet schools have been used very successfully in other states because they attract children from both urban and suburban communities. The state of Connecticut has, in response to a decision that the Hartford, Connecticut schools are segregated, has created literally dozens of themed magnet schools throughout the state, and some 30,000 students today attend those magnet schools. And the children that attend the magnet schools come not only from the urban districts, but from suburban districts. And the schools have to be located in the proper place. They have to be supported by excellent teachers and staff. They have to have themes that are attractive to children and to their parents. And they have to be run very, very well. And we propose to launch in New Jersey, with the state's agreement, we hope, a network of magnet schools focused in the 8 counties where segregation is most intense. Secondly, interdistrict choice. And by that, I mean giving children in urban districts the opportunity to attend schools in a nearby suburb. Now, New Jersey has a law that says that children have to go to school in the town they live. This would be an exception to that law. And interdistrict choice is a remedy that has been successful in Massachusetts for over 60 years. There's a program run out of Boston, and it's called METCO, METCO. I forget what the letters stand for, probably Metropolitan Educational Training and Opportunity, something like that. But METCO has 35 or so suburban towns that voluntarily permit children from the city of Boston to go to school in their schools. And as I said, that METCO program has been running for over 60 years. And educators all over the country know about it. Books have been written about it. And what we know about the METCO program is that the vast majority of children who have gone through that program are glad that they did. They felt their education was better. And if they had the choice, they would want their children to go to the program as well. We think we can implement a robust choice program like METCO in New Jersey, and we're anxiously awaiting the chance to educate the state officials about the METCO program and how it could work here. Third, we have very high quality VOTEC schools in New Jersey, schools that require students to pass a test before they can get in. And the students from those schools sometimes get admitted to some of the best colleges in the country. Regrettably, because of the admission standards currently in effect, very few urban school children, very, very few Black and Latino children are attending those VOTEC schools. And we think that has to change. We think the state has to change the admission standards. We think the testing has to be changed to give adequate opportunities to urban school children who have the ability to perform well in these high quality schools. And we have the statistics, and they're embarrassing, to look at these high quality schools and see how few children, how few Black and Latino children are attending them. And we're determined to fix that. And finally, there's a program that's been operating around the country in other states and in New Jersey as well, called community schools. And community schools, if you think of it, it's as a wraparound program that expands what a school does for children and parents. Patterson, for example, has an excellent community school program. The kinds of services that community schools provide include counseling, English language support, not only for students, but for parents, healthcare support, for example, eye examinations, hearing examinations, the provision of supplemental services that children in urban districts need but are not being provided for by the school districts today. Now, community schools are not new, but there's been a renaissance, a great expansion in interest in community schools. The state of California in the last few years has appropriated over $4 billion to create community schools in every one of their underperforming school districts. And we thought that because our urban districts may lose children to the choice program or to the magnet school program, we did not want our urban school districts to be in any way harmed. We wanted them to be enhanced, to be better supported. And the community school program brings enormous resources into schools. That includes money and staff and services that the school districts don't have now. We think that the community school program is a very important support system to strengthen our urban schools so that the children whose families elect to leave the children in those school districts get the benefit of the community school program, which we think will be a tremendous enhancement. I visited the Patterson Community School Program in at least 8 or 10 schools, and I was very impressed by what they did. The happiest part of that visit, I remember, was walking into a room that had a rack of dresses. And I asked, what was that for? And the person in charge said, these are prom dresses. In case there are girls who've been asked to the prom and can't afford a dress, we wanted to make them available. And that was just a small example of the kind of support service that a good, successful community school program can offer. So those are the basic 4 remedies. I have to emphasize something. You can't change segregation unless children move. There's just no other way to do it. And in putting together these remedies, I personally have talked to, I think, every expert in the country that has had experience with desegregating school districts. And these are the best remedies that have been recommended to our legal team. I'm going to stop there. Happy to answer any questions and grateful to hear any suggestions from any of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Sine. There are several questions actually in the Q&A, and some questions were provided in advance, but we're actually going to wait until the end so that everybody can have a chance to respond to some of these very complex questions that we're all eager to hear the responses to. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce our respondents, which are representative of the community stakeholder groups working on this case for the last few years. First, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Dr. Charles Boyer. He is a pastor at Greater Mount Zion AME Church in Trenton and is co-founder of Salvation and Social Justice, a nonpartisan Black faith-rooted public policy organization. So Charles, just wave for those who don't know how famous you are. Okay. Christian, I'd like to introduce then Christian Estevez. Christian Estevez is President Emeritus of the Latino Action Network and a longtime labor activist. The Latino Action Network is one of the primary plaintiffs on the case. So welcome, Christian. I'd like to also introduce Vivian Cox-Frazier. She is President and CEO of the Urban League of Essex County, also a plaintiff in the case, and has been in that role since 2004. Hi, Vivian. And last but certainly not least, my good friend Tom Poirier, that we are everywhere together talking about this. He is the education chairperson for the NAACP New Jersey State Conference and a retired educator. Welcome, Tom. So I'd like to go in that order. So and each respondent has about 3 to 4 minutes. I will be kind of sending you alerts. But I'd like to start with Charles. Charles, your thoughts on the case and potential remedies and your work.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dela Cruz, and you know, again, thank you for the legal team for doing this tremendous work that gets us to this point. I think it's just important to share. You know, I grew up in New Jersey segregated schools. I grew up in Plainfield, New Jersey, and especially during those times in the 80s and the 90s. Plainfield was really dealing, I mean, major segregation. As you can see, it is still highly segregated. And the high school was really off the hook, as we would say back in the day. And my good friend Christian Estevez here can testify to that, as we both were there at the same time. My parents illegally sent me to Piscataway High School. And so I think that's Piscataway being one of the more diverse school districts in the state, and one of the better school districts. So I illegally went to Piscataway High School, but this is only after they first sent me to a majority white private school, which was a traumatizing experience. And I say all that to say, and going to Piscataway was a beautiful experience in comparison. And I lay all that to say, in the community work and outreach that we have done over the years, what we have heard from Black and Latino students is very similar to what I felt, especially going to a majority white private school. Many of the students replied to us in response to this that they didn't necessarily want to be in white schools. And I think that that's important in this conversation, because as we look to do integration, we have to take into account what that actually means. It's important for us to understand that if people choose to congregate by race and focus is one thing, but if they're forced to be segregated by law and resources is another. So what we heard from young people is that they wanted integration of funding, of resources. They wanted to be recognized as valuable in and of themselves. So to the point that Justice Stein raised up, putting the kind of resources and the attraction into the urban school districts, the things that are that need to be there for those to be attractive spaces in and of themselves, is critically important, because that is what students are saying. They are saying they want an integration of resources. You know, the major work that Justice Stein and others did in the past with the Abbott school districts and that kind of funding was critically important. But we know from the very beginning that that was under assault, right? Because there's always this kind of backlash to progress. And these students also fear the backlash from white students and parents and teachers if they end up in these other spaces. And so it's critically important with the kind of remedies that have been raised up here, kind of take all of that into account, right? This is not merely shuffling Black children on buses across lines involuntarily into white spaces. This is creating voluntary modalities and creating new schools like magnet schools, which bring people into spaces voluntarily and attracts them because they all want to benefit from a quality education. And so that these are all critical pieces to understand. Some other things that we heard, right, is that the integration of how children are treated. So we have to deal with things like zero tolerance policies. And even when you have Black children in spaces with white children, if the majority of the staff is still majority white, Black children and Latino children will still be treated in ways that are unfair and disproportionate, even in a so-called integrated space. So how we deal with trauma, how we deal with equity, how we make sure that the staff, what happened in integration before was that there was a drain of Black teachers, right, when school integration happened. And that was something that really undermined things. And so right now, even in majority Black schools, there are majority white teachers. So putting the kind of resources necessary to make sure that teaching staff is representative of the children that they are teaching is critically important. And we also have to make sure that things like Amistad and history and all of the pieces that are necessary, the students we talked to were majorly concerned that there's also an integration of curriculum and history and culture, that the richness of the cultures are there, that people aren't integration should not mean assimilation, in that we are all just being, put under the umbrella of white culture, white ideology, white history, right? That there should be a celebration of the various cultures. And so the last couple of pieces that I would say is, one, we also think that it's critically important in order to deal with the volunteerism of where people go. And going back to my situation, we think it's important to abolish the zip code barriers. Home rule in and of itself has a very racist history. It is literally the mechanism in which was set up to segregate and create hyper-segregated schools. So we think it's critically important to strike that outright in order that people may voluntarily go where they want to go. Sometimes people live closer to a better school district, which is across a zip code barrier, but they can't go because they legally cannot go. You can't talk about any of this without talking about affordable housing, right? And making sure that that affordable housing situation is magnified, 1 million times over what it is now, so that people can actually be integrated where they live as well. The last piece that I want to say in closing is that we have to understand that segregated schools as they stand are very bad for white students. And that is a piece which my colleague, Elise Body, had raised up a very long time ago, that it is not merely just bad for Black and Latino students, it is bad for white students. Because if white students are constantly in all white spaces in a country which is increasingly Black and brown, they are lacking the skills, the purview, and the social skills necessary to deal with a majority Black and brown nation which is emerging. Also, it creates kind of outsized senses of superiority, and all of these things which create this false world where Black and brown people's history does not matter, and where their perspectives are not respected. So I just wanted to close with that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you, Charles. So Christian, your thoughts?
Thank you. So as my brother, Reverend Boyer, mentioned, him and I both come from the same city. We both come from Plainfield. We both grew up, especially in our early years, in Plainfield, and our parents, both of our parents had, similar reaction to, the situation there, where the schools, especially the high school, was off the hook, right? But that off the hook situation is something that, I've grappled with, and many of us have grappled with, as to why it was off the hook. And, and we reject the idea that it's off the hook because Black and Latino people are savages that, only know violence, right? What we understand is that, there was a situation created, as Reverend Boyer mentioned, right, about the zip code, this wall that was built up, this apartheid that was built up, that kept people of color trapped in this spot of concentrated poverty, right, where opportunities were not available, where you had high unemployment, not because people were too lazy to work, but because people would not give us the jobs, right? And so, you know, in the late 60s, after I believe it was 1967, where Charles and Anna Booker challenged segregation within the city of Plainfield, a landmark case that changed how segregation was treated within the borders of a municipality, right? That, along with other things, you know, ended up triggering white flight, that where white people were like, you know, basically had made a decision that if they were told that they had to have their children sit next to Black and brown children, that they'd rather leave. And they were allowed to move out of cities like Plainfield and go into the suburbs. Even if they abandoned their homes, they were able to get new mortgages and get new houses, and leave their homes behind. So I know Charles remembers this, and I clearly remember, you know, our early years being surrounded by a sea of boarded up houses. You know, that's what Plainfield was like when we were little kids. Every other house was boarded up because people had abandoned them. And so we grew up in this place where, you know, we didn't know it as kids, but when people fled and abandoned their houses, they took their tax dollars with them. And so there was no money for books. There was no money to replace, you know, to fix the falling bricks in the buildings. There was no money to pay the teachers, right? So we were getting less because of this whole situation. And then we were blamed if we acted out, right? We were blamed as being subhuman if we acted out, right? And our parents reacted by trying to find ways out. And, you know, Charles' parents took him in the direction of, towards the west, towards Piscataway. My mother first took us north to North Plainfield, where we moved across the border, you know, right, really, you know, one block in. And, you know, North Plainfield, even though we were able to invade the one block into the city, you know, because you can find an apartment there, they were not prepared. So when Latino, you know, us and a few other Latino families first moved in there, and a few Black families, you know, the school district was not prepared to defend us. So we ended up being the victims of racism. And when we pushed back against that, we were punished. We were kicked out of school for fighting when people called us niggers and spits, right? And so we were the bad guys. Eventually, my mother and my brothers got together and rented a small apartment in Westfield, which was in the other direction. And I will say that I didn't know it at the time, but the fact that when I got to Westfield in middle school, that the principal of Edison Middle School was a Black male, right? Who was thinking about the Black and Latino students who were coming into town, and worked with a professor from Princeton University to create the Catch program, which was designed to help us integrate and help us have the supports we needed, help us deal with the mental issues of being in this environment, right, and having the supports. So when we went to high school and that program continued, we had the Black guidance counselor and others and other teachers who helped us when we said we wanted Black African American studies class, right? And so we were supported there, and it helped us integrate and also succeed to the extent that we did. Not that everything was perfect, but we had those supports, and I got to witness both things, right? I got to witness both my early time in North Plainfield, where we didn't have the supports, and how that went badly. And I got to see how in Westfield, when these programs and these supports were in place, how it helped us actually do better. And so for me, talking about these remedies is not just based on me studying or learning about history. It's about looking at my own path and saying, I've seen it done bad. I've seen it done better. And I think it's on all of our interest that we look at these different things and figure out a way to create these options so that people have the options. Again, you know, the idea of voluntary, I don't want anybody who's in the audience to think that we're saying that it's voluntary for the school districts or for the state. No, we're saying it's mandatory that you create these opportunities. The voluntary is for the children and the families, right, where you go. And that has to be emphasized all around. And so as we're thinking about these remedies, we want to think about figuring out all the best options for everybody, all the best opportunities. We need to think about the consequences of those opportunities and saying, what are some of the pitfalls that people have told us about if they go into a new environment? And how do we mitigate against that coming in the door? And also have a certain level of patience to know that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know necessarily how, even with mitigation, how certain situations are going to play out. And so we have to be ready to continually revisit these things for a very long time to make sure that we're adjusting to new realities and making sure that everybody's supported and that they feel like this is really a value added to their lives and not a punishment.
Thank you, Christian. I really appreciate that point about the mandatory on the system, right, and impacting the system, and not so much on the youth and on the students. That's a really important point to think about. Vivian, you want to share your comments?
Sure, I guess all of us have different experiences. And so my experience is not in New Jersey growing up. I grew up in Washington, D.C., but I was a child that was bused, so I think about the impact of that experience for me as a child. And actually, one side of my street was bused and the other side of the street wasn't bused, which was just kind of odd anyway. But I tell the story, which was that when I graduated from elementary school, I was the valedictorian of my elementary school class. So I knew I was smart. My school told me I was smart. My teachers thought I was smart. And when I got bused, which was at the age of 12, I got bused to a school on the other side in DC. And on the first day of school, I signed up for all the honors class. And it was like the worst day that I remember. I mean, I guess it's almost 50 years later. I still remember that experience of going into a place feeling like I didn't belong and I wasn't prepared for that place I went into. And so, when I was approached about the suit, I was all in because I felt that, in fact, it's been 70 years since Brown versus Board of Education, and we still haven't solved this issue of, I'm going to say, integration. I'll say that instead of desegregation, because I think, yes, it was segregated at one point, but our aspirations now is for diverse and inclusive schools. So it is about creating environments where all children feel that they can thrive and have access to high educational standards and opportunities. And I also say, I think there's so many threats to public education today. And I think about trans and LGBTQ students, free speech, even of educators, and even the broader attacks on democracy that are going on right now. And I think this fight is essential to that fight. And it's crucial, I believe, that we renew and even reinvigorate our commitment to truly integrated public schools. And I think in New Jersey, we tout that we're a diverse, one of the most diverse states. And yet, as Bob Kim said, we're like most segregated school system, one of the most segregated school systems in the country. And so decades of research proves that there's harm for being educationally segregated. And certainly the political and racial divides that we see right now in our country, polarization in our country, in our state, the racial wealth gap, even disproportionate incarceration rates, disparities in health access, they all are, I guess, from the same fruit of the rotten fruit of segregation. And so in many ways, I feel like this is our time, for anybody on the call, for the lawyers, all of us here. We only can fight, in our lifetimes. And I do believe that this is the fight of our time. And it's not just for the schools, because as I said, I think is boiling over to so many other things, even as we talked about whether or not, what gets taught in schools, what books get banned in schools, what our children see and read and are exposed to. So in so many ways, I guess I'll say I feel like we moved backwards. you know, and certainly I think the schools are more segregated than they were probably in the 80s in some places, you know, and certainly I think Reverend Boyer, you mentioned about housing. So we build housing, and we certainly know there's affordable housing crisis in New Jersey. So I really believe the approach we have to have is, I agree on the thing, options for students in education, but I also think we have to think about other policy areas that intersect with education that contribute to the lack of diversity in the schools, and that is housing. And I think we need to think about every policy lever that we have that can be weighed on there, whether it's the housing choice vouchers, whether it's I'll say the qualified allocation plan that's in the state housing policy for where you build low-income housing and things like that. I think we have to think of all of those things and use all the levers. And then I'll close to say that right now we have an inter-district choice program right here in the state of New Jersey. And in Essex County, none of the districts outside of the urban districts choose to participate. So as what says, it cannot be voluntary. It has to be mandated. And so I'm encouraged, and I just want to certainly recognize the attorneys on this case, and certainly Judge Stein, all the work you've done in your career in Lethbridge, just really to help you know, communities of color and children of color have access to the opportunities that all students in New Jersey have. And I think we're all entering this not with a preconceived notion. You know, we want to be open, as even though we're plaintiffs and lawyers, want it for everybody on the call. We can talk about work every place, but some things we know are, you know, like the home rule in New Jersey is a little bit different than maybe a lot of other places, right? So there are things that are New Jersey centric that we're going to have to confront. And certainly with all the people on the call, we want as much input as possible. And this, we're going to have a website, a place where people can register their comments and feedback. We want to have an open process, but no, change doesn't happen without the work. And we want everybody to put in the effort to help make this and help pressure. I do believe we're going to have to put pressure on this system to get the change we want to see. So it won't be all webinars, I don't think. Yeah, we're in for this fight. So thank you everyone for being on the call.
Thank you, Vivian. And you brought up some like really important intersectional issues, you know, even thinking about the recent decision around affirmative action and what we've seen in other states, right? That immediately, as soon as they took out affirmative action, enrollment into higher ed was down 50% among Black and Latinos. So I think, yes, it's incredibly important that we figure out a solution now to prepare our students for success. Tom, I'd like to hand over the floor to you. Any your comments and responses to the discussion?
Thank you very much. I'm the New Jersey State Conference Education Chairperson. I'm here this evening only because our president, Richard Smith, is not 100%, and therefore he has asked me to represent the interests of the NAACP. And I'm going to keep my remarks very short because I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to react to some of the things that have been said so far. But prior to today, the NAACP has made no public statements on possible remedies to the segregation lawsuit. We believe, or we decided it was politically best to wait until a legal decision was rendered before giving a voice to possible remedies. For the past couple of minutes, I've heard my colleagues make some comments in regards to possible remedies. I can say that based upon my experiences, there is some disagreement possibly as far as possible solutions for forthcoming. And I would strongly recommend that after we listen to the participants who are here at the workshop, the webinar, that the plaintiffs get together and have a conversation among ourselves so that we are cohesive and coherent on what we see and what recommendations we can give the lawyers in regards to possible remedies. But any remedy that is brought forth, as far as the NAACP is concerned, must address completely with the Article 1 of the New Jersey Constitution, be it de facto desegregation or be it de jure segregation. That's either by law or by by circumstance, the segregation in our state is illegal and should not be tolerated in our New Jersey public schools. The October decision that was rendered by the Robert Lubley also determined that the Commissioner of Education has the authority to address segregated matters in our state without there being any difficulties. In addition, as has been already said, local control does not trump the state's ability to enact actions in regards to segregation. These legal markings make it very clear that where segregation exists, the state is obligated to address and provide remedies to segregation. We all know that segregation has a negative impact on our children, and we are very concerned about the future of our children and what must be done. One of the concerns, and I guess I have to make an I statement, is I'm very concerned that whatever process we have to go through in order to achieve an equitable system, it does not take forever. The longer this problem goes unsolved, the more difficult the number of students who will be impacted in a negative manner are going to be something that needs to be addressed. And our kids have gone too long in a system that is not fair or equitable to them. I'm looking forward to the comments that the participants are going to make. And again, I strongly recommend that the plaintiffs get together very soon so that we know where each other is and what our recommendations will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, again, the urgency is so important. I really appreciate the North Cornwall Center's research around learning loss and the impact on Black and Latino students, especially during COVID. So when we compile something that was pre-existing to COVID and the gaps that were there before COVID, now we're even 2 or 3 years behind that. So how do we really, in the political context of all the things going on in schools with parents' rights groups and all these things, how do we truly empower our communities to be able to get the educational equity that they deserve? So thank you, Tom. I'm going to pass over my moderating responsibilities over to Vandine and Kalina, who will be moderating the questions and discussions in the chat and that were submitted in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vandine Campbell. I'm an Associate Director at the Cornwall Center at Rutgers University, Newark. Kalina.
Hi, Kalina Berryman, co-convener of Our Children, Our Schools.
All right, so we shift the conversation now to looking at the questions raised ahead of time through the registration and also in the Q&A. The conversation so far has been thought-provoking and insightful, and I'm sure these questions will push us along. So I'll start out with one question from the registration. What type of resources will be available for restitution in underfunded and decaying schools?
Well, let me try to respond to that. We don't call it restitution. The funding formula that the state adopted pursuant to Abbott is up next year and has to be recalculated. And we applaud the Education Law Center for their effort to make sure that the new funding formula treats the urban districts adequately. But the community school program that I described before is a step in the direction of providing urban schools with resources beyond what the formula provides. These are extra funds. The community school coordinator is responsible for implementing the community school to meet the needs of that school and that community. And the resources that are going to be put into the segregated urban school districts are going to be in addition to the funding and resources provided by the formula. So we see this as a significant boost in resources and programs and all sorts of opportunities to enhance the services that a public school can provide in the urban setting. We hope that schools will extend their hours. We hope the schools will provide for additional learning in the summer. We want the resources that the community schools provide to be available to parents. We want the healthcare services to make it convenient and easy for children to get resources and treatments they need. So I see this as a significant boost in resources for these segregated urban districts.
And I'll just chime in from Education Law Center. This is Bob Kim, to say that we, as many of you know, on a separate advocacy track, ELC is pursuing additional changes to the formula to better meet the needs of all districts, really, but in particular urban districts moving forward. There's also no reason why we can't consider changes to the formula that address persistently segregated school districts and try to take into account structurally how the district could provide funding to encourage integration and support for integration activities through that process as well. So, you know, just wanted you to know that there's parallel advocacy going on, and we welcome obviously all of your ideas and thoughts in that direction.
And if I could just add one other thing, we sometimes hear concerns expressed that any of the remedies that we've described will cost money, and that money will be taken away from urban school districts that need it so badly. I think it's part of our job to make sure that that doesn't happen. We agree that whether it's magnet schools or Justice Stein has mentioned community schools or the other remedies, including transportation just for interdistrict choice, for example, that there is very likely to be significant additional funding that's required. But I think we will be resolute in the course of the mediation process to assure that that money is not money that's taken away from the urban school districts, but that is added to the budget to make that all possible.
All right, thank you, Attorney Lusberg. Good evening, everyone. So I think this is both an anxious and exciting time for many of us. And, you know, justice really does live in the remedies. Justice Stein discussed potential remedies, magnet schools, vocational schools, community schools. Attorney Kim brought up the need for community input. Charles Boyer provided some youth and community perspective around the desired kind of integration that we want to see when it comes to resources and it being a non-traumatic experience. So in that vein, Kathleen Witcher asked, and Marcella Samidadrift asked a similar question: what is the plan for community input and awareness building, especially from students and parents who are most impacted and often marginalized?
Well, I think this session today is part of that plan. We're here today to hear from members of the community. And if there's interest and a need, we'll try to convene other sessions like this so that we get the benefit of comments and concerns from the community. And that's why we're all here today, to listen, to learn, and to have the community tell us what's on their mind.
And that process does not end today. We're you know, you can reach us. I'm sure that you know, the organizers of this conference at Cornwall and others will be able to provide contact information. There was some discussion that Vivian mentioned earlier about setting up a website so that we can get input that way. But however we do it, we are resolute about continuing to listen and to take people's real life concerns into account, and to communicate those during the course of the mediation process.
Let me just add this. Community outreach is not in the center of my wheelhouse. I'm not sure it's in the center of Larry's either. We understand and appreciate how vitally important it is. It's a lesson that was drummed into us repeatedly at the beginning of this effort by Elise Potty, who does have that experience, and experience again that I don't have. And I say this to you all because we're going to need everybody's help to make sure that the potential remedies are communicated, to make sure that the outreach is done correctly. We understand that it's as important, in many ways more important, than the litigation effort that we've been involved in. It's just something that personally I don't have a lot of experience in.
Hi, this is Justly. So I would like to speak a little bit to this, given the experience. I see Charles right after me around this topic, because we, 4 years ago, we went really targeted, pulling together Black and Latino communities. We chose certain districts. We went out and we had these conversations in community, and we've been doing that in variations ever since. And really, again, what we find is, having community discussions that are informative, because most of the people that we reached out with didn't even realize they were segregated on the ground, right? Like when you tell them, hey, by the way, did you realize you live in a segregated community? They were completely unaware that they were in a segregated community. They just knew that they weren't getting the same resources as other people, right? So how we talk about this has to be very nuanced, I think, to the community, but also it has to be solution focused and driven, not just towards identifying problems, but also engaging people in the solution and being able to talk about it and participating in this process as much as they can, either through our own individual organizations or in whatever ways they can through their schools. We've been training youth to really have these discussions within their schools. We give like youth handbooks where they're able to have discussions in circles on their own around school segregation and this case. And the resources are available to them in English and Spanish, and in very plain English and Spanish, right? Nothing that's super confusing for them to be able to access the information. But, I'm always very mindful, if I'm entering into a discussion, that we're going to face fear in the face of, because of stories of past, and that we have to have talking points on how to help overcome those fears, as opposed to fueling them or having solutions to address and buffer those fears.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dela Cruz. And yeah, just to dovetail off of that, there's been a tremendous amount of outreach throughout these 5 years that even gets us who are in this space, gave us kind of the talking points and fuel to what gets us here. I also just want to say that we have advised counsel to make sure that this very question and that community outreach and input even be part of what we try to get from the state. So one, that becomes something that has to be invested in. So the same way when cannabis legalization or any of these various other things, a lot of these pieces has to involve the state having hearings, and actually making community input as part of the process. So not only in this upfront and during negotiations, but we've also advised counsel to try to make that as part of the framework that comes out of this mediation. So the last piece that I want to say is that we often fight, and we often hear that communities want to have input. And so I also challenge communities, as we challenge and advocate the state, that when community input comes time to happen, that you need to show up. And so, we have been we have gotten this in various other spaces and have fought for the community input. And then when it's time for community input, we struggle getting community to show up when it's input time. So I'm challenging community that you have to be robustly in that space when those opportunities happen.
I wanted to ask the lawyers a particular question they may not be able to respond to right now, but just think about it and get back to us. what is the timeline around this community input that we're talking about? I mean, how much time? There are lots of organizers on this call. People can put something together if they know what we should be aiming for, and think about what form you want this input to take. Exactly what it is, other than email chat boxes and that kind of thing. Just what is it you're asking for the community to give to you, right? What do you want that to look like? So again, I'm not saying you're going to answer that right now, but just think about that, and we'll find out some way to get it out we'll get the word out.
Will do.
Christian, I see your hand up.
Yeah. Sorry. So I'm definitely not answering for the attorneys, but I will say that, I started college in '93, right around the time that, Abbott, right after the Abbott decision, the first Abbott decision, and as that stuff was started to be implemented in one way or the other, I found myself somehow doing community work related to the Abbott remedies, right? In terms of like, advocating for funding for one thing or the other, or working on projects where we use funding to create equity in schools around science and STEM and different things. And then going forward, when I finished school and settled down and went to buy my first house, I went and deliberately bought my house in Plainfield and wanted to be part of the solution. In 2007, ran for the school board, got on thinking I was going to try to do my part, and quickly found out that all the good things that we tried to do there, all the things we were doing, while we made some improvements, it felt like we were, in many cases, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, right? Because we could only work within the boundaries of our municipality, of within our city. And that was a very frustrating thing to me. But what I also realized was that all the people I was working with, my fellow school board members, the school, administration, the teachers, everybody was working so hard and trying to do everything we could to help these kids, that it was hard to lift your head up and think and dream bigger than the problem in front of us. And I think that is a reality that we're up against here, which is that everybody in the fight for educational equity is focused on, a lot of time, most of the time, on the kids that we have in front of us right now and trying to help them. And we have to be challenged, and we need to be woken up to say, while we do that, we can't ignore the kids who are there now, but we need to dream bigger. And this lawsuit is about dreaming bigger. And so, this challenge of getting the community out, right? For years, for decades, I mean, for more than my lifetime, people have been told, you can never fix this. The politicians, there's no political will to end segregation in New Jersey, so forget about it, right? And that's why we went to court, because we said the politicians won't do it on their own, because they fear losing their seats or whatever, from backlash from whoever. And so we had to go this route. But we also know, given the fact that our activists are engaged in the current fight to save the kids who are there right now, that we need to ring the bell and say, okay, while you continue to do that, and while we all continue to work together on that, we need to imagine the world as we want it to be. And so we also know that, it's hard for us because we're all nonprofits or community organizations, grassroots groups, so we don't have those kind of resources. So one of the things that I've been saying to the attorneys, and we've been saying in our coalition, is that one of the demands I would like to see us make is that the state use its resources for these forums, right? That we define a period of time and say, the state, you have the resource to do this. You have the ability to put out the call, but you need to have us as partners at the table in terms of framing those spaces and creating those spaces. But use your resources, because you've been using your resources or not using your resources to address this problem, right? And this is a drop in the bucket, just to use your resources to put the call out, to create the spaces, the same way you do when they're going to do a hospital closing. You commandeer a high school, or you commandeer an auditorium, and you hire consultants and media folks to put out commercials and all the stuff to invite people to it. Do all those things to bring people and to let people know that they have a voice in this. Get them there, include us, right? And let's have this conversation statewide. And I want to hear not just from the proponents of integration, not just our allies on this. I want to hear from the opponents.
Mhm.
I want to hear from those people who oppose integration. I want to hear what leg they think they're standing on, right? And let them, and so we can know what we're up against here. So with that kind of robust conversation that only the state has the resources to really pull off, can we get to a point where we can say we left no stone unturned, that everybody had an opportunity, and like Reverend Boyer said, people have to show up, but we have to make sure that we put all the resources at our disposal, which the state has, to the job of making those opportunities available.
Christian, you and I have talked about this, so I agree with you. We will certainly raise that in the course of the mediation and have telegraphed that would be an issue that needed to be discussed during the mediation process, which is opening up the process, including the state, to community input, and we will raise it again.
Thank you.
Charles, just to respond briefly to your question, the mediation, I think educated guess could take 3 to 6 months. So there's time, plenty of time ahead of us. But beyond that, when we start with the implementation of magnet schools, there's going to be tremendous need for community outreach, because the folks up in Connecticut that have done this before us have told me that they didn't decide on the location or the theme for a magnet school without community input to make sure that the theme and the location and the process meets the needs of the families that are going to have children in those schools. Similarly with the interdistrict choice program, the METCO program, for example, has a designated parent in each suburban school designated as a parent to match with a child from an urban district. And they help the child if there are problems. There's METCO staff in the suburban district. So as we implement the choice program, we're going to want to hear from the community to find out what they want. So I think this community outreach is going to be ongoing, in my judgment, for the next 10 years.
Just wanted to chime in briefly. To answer the question about timing and what the attorneys might be looking for, I'll just speak for myself in saying that I think that there's there is both time, as has been referenced earlier. This process will go on for a while, and hearing the idea that community engagement must be part of the state responsibility and the framework moving forward, that would also lead to additional time to get community input. Having said that, I do think that it would be important if there are really important ideas for remedies, or particularly related to the ones that Justice Stein has laid out in the attachment, and also other ones related to this call today, that you think are really important to raise up. I do think that it would be helpful to sort of get some more specificity around those ideas in the coming weeks, if possible. This is not to say that it can't also come later over time, but I think that if there's something that rises to the top for you, I think it would be really helpful to hear. I heard Vivian talk about the interdistrict choice program, and that none of the districts outside of a certain county, I think it might have been Essex, want to participate. I'm interested in comments like that and sort of what could be changed. But all the other ideas that have been mentioned here about true integration, what would be needed within schools to make students feel safe, supported, and respected in diverse environments. What I look for is how to turn that idea, that goal, into a program or policy, into something actionable. How would I turn that legislatively or in a policy, make that into a policy that would have some contours behind it? What is an example of success corresponding to that idea or that sentiment? And so if there are ideas like that that can be kind of turned into something specific that we could then consider, I think that would be helpful to hear about in the shorter term, but not putting pressure that that has to happen in the short term.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. I was speaking while muted. I wanted to just combine a few questions to sort of move us along. The questions about community input actually had another aspect to it as to how will the community hear back from the process. And I think that picks up on Larry's earlier points about the mediation process being a confidential process. But I just wanted to raise that part of the question from a representative of the NAACP in Irvington. While I have the floor, I'll mention a couple of other ideas that were raised in the chat, and so we can respond to a few things at a time. An anonymous attendee asked for consideration on mandating DOE to utilize consolidation or regionalization powers to remedy segregation impacting the 23 districts. And then another participant, Peter Bushbaum, asked about inviting parents from states or districts who've been through integration to talk about their experiences as a part of this process. So just throwing out 3 points for sort of collective response to move it along.
Let me address the NAACP concern about informing the public. As I said at the outset, I'm confident that there'll be a time at which there will be information that will be provided to the public. I think everybody who's involved in this mediation understands that it's not supposed to be, smoke-filled black, back rooms where deals are made. The public has to know about this, and we will certainly be discussing the appropriate time for that. I would remind everybody that we are required under the court's order to provide status reports in the middle of December and the middle of January, which will be public and will provide hopefully some insight. Hard to know right now how much that will be, but there's an acute understanding that we can't be operating in secrecy here, and that all of you and others need to know what's happening. And I can assure you that we'll, on our side, do what we can to make that happen as quickly and as thoroughly as possible, while at the same time without being disloyal to the mediation process, which needs to be confidential in order to be effective. So, I know it's a kind of a lawyerly answer, but I mean, we are trying to walk that thin line there. I think Judge Buxbaum's observation is a really interesting one. It's a good suggestion, and we'll think about that and perhaps bring that back.
So another combined question from the audience around the impact on families and how we're thinking about that. Tahisha Henry asked, what steps would you recommend at the state level to be proactive in meeting the needs of students who may choose to transition into another space where a different type of trauma can or may occur, that she's currently doing this work now? And then an anonymous attendee asked, and are privileged, suburban, rich white families, et cetera, going to give up their privilege by offering everyone a choice to change schools? So I think that this is a pressing perspective people have had. What are your thoughts on that, on how, when this actually happens and is actualized, how people on both sides will be impacted and how we'll be prepared to respond? Jesselli.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, definitely the lawyers would be the experts, and Judge Stein from all their research, but we've been, as part of our outreach, we had an education policy roundtable last January with the New Jersey Consortium for Immigrant Children, and part of the case was discussed, as among all the other issues, that Latino immigrant children are facing in schools. And one of the number one recommendations and concerns that came about from those discussions, which is in our report on our website, is that we need another vehicle to report these kind of civil rights violations against students and parents that is not housed within DOE. So that there be some sort of role with the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights and the Office of Attorney General, where it's not the DOE policing themselves, because historically that just has not worked for families to actually be able to have recourse for so many of these tedious policies, special education, IEPs, bilingual education. There's almost no real avenues. There's a lot of policies written, but there's no real avenues for people to be able to have accountability when schools are not complying with what the mandates are, what the requirements are. So that's something that we have been working on in collaboration with partners, and you'll see more work around that. But we think it's critical to also have like an outside accountability piece that students and parents have access to for these potential civil rights violations and harms they may face.
Kalina, the state conference is very, very concerned about sending, for those students who may wish to go to a school district outside of their community, about sending children into hostile communities. We all know and have memories of what happened throughout America when there was segregation and the response to that decree itself. So there needs to be concern. I mean, one of my concerns for a first grader or second grader, how much could they handle, or how much should they handle in order to go to, if they choose to transfer to a school district outside of their own community. It is easier for the upperclassmen, junior high school through high school to make that adjustment, but the hostility is strong, and we need to make sure the state, one of the things that when we mention community schools, that's an aspect that needs to be incorporated into the process to make sure that the students are being treated well, that there's an understanding of what's going on. I did a presentation very shortly, not too long ago, and the conversation was, who buys most of the rap music in our country? And we know that's mostly white students who buy the rap music. So there's a need, a cross-cultural need that needs to be explored in order to move forward.
Thank you for those responses. All right, combining another couple of questions, there's a general concern about equity. Where is the equity? Is a question that was submitted. And then there's another question here from an anonymous attendee. How will we measure equity? And so for me, I think it might be worth sort of talking directly about equity in this conversation.
I'll just respond briefly and say that equity is at the heart of what the purpose of this litigation is, and to ensure that all students have equitable access to both a diverse and a high quality education. So there is equity that is at the heart of this goal. The heart of the litigation is to achieve greater equity for all students. But having said that, I think that particular, the feeling that students would not, if to the extent that students aren't experiencing equity, or that equity is not being met consistently in district by district or school by school, I think that that's worth considering, and we should listen to ideas about how to achieve equity, how to measure equity, how to the earlier point around accountability. So if you have thoughts about that, we do want to think and consider about ways that the state could measure equity, measure data and progress around equity. So ideas on that, I think, are welcome. I also, to the earlier point, I think ideas are also welcome about the extent to which the state should be required to consider programs or policies to increase equity and to support diversity and integration including within schools, whether it's regarding programming, curriculum, other ways to increase understanding and emphasize the importance of diversity and to create safe and welcoming school climates. So I think that those issues have been heard, and we should think about and hear from your ideas to kind of suggest or put forward ideas along those lines to both increase equity, to measure it, and to address these concerns that we are consistently hearing around ensuring that the schools are indeed good, healthy, and welcoming places for students.
Tom, are you going to add something?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. We do have another question. Do we have time for another question, Vandine?
I'm not sure. I'm looking at Charles on the screen.
Okay, so I'll also, these are not necessarily related, but one theme that has come up is around school funding, that if students who begin to leave school districts that are primarily Black and Brown, if they begin to leave their districts, will the funding go with them? Will that leave historically underfunded districts, their funding more exasperated? So that was one question. And then another from Tomas Varela of the New Jersey Black Empowerment Coalition. They wanted to know that if there are other groups that want to be involved in advocacy, what are the strategies that they can utilize to support the lawyers as you're litigating and mediating? What can they do? So one, school funding. Is this going to make things worse? And then also, what can advocacy groups do to support this mediation process? And Christian.
So, I mean, the question about the school funding, I think the lawyers are going to have to, hash that out, and that's something that's a little more complicated than I understand. But Latino Action Network is definitely concerned about not hollowing out the funding of our urban district. So, that's something that we're not going to take lightly. We're not going to let go of that issue, right? So even if the attorneys come back and say this is what's on the table, if it includes gutting out our schools in our communities, then the answer from LAM is going to be no, right? So I want to just be clear on that. In terms of exactly how it works, I think we need to engage people who understand that and can figure that out. And I'm sure we have those minds here. On the other question, in terms of how other organizations or the groups can have a say, and I've seen that in a lot of the questions about gatekeeping and all that. The idea of having these broad period of time of broad sessions where community forums where people can come in is to make sure that everybody has a say. And like I said, I'm not just talking about our allies, I'm talking about everybody. I want to hear from the opponents because we want to let them get their ideas out there so we can then address those issues, right? So we want to hear from everybody. But in the meantime, I would say that hopefully when we're sending out stuff to the participants, the attendees here, that we're sending out the contact information for the panelists and for the organizations. I tell you, if you reach out to Latino Action Network, I'm sure the same thing goes to NAACP. We'd be happy to hear from you. And I want to hear ideas. I want to hear from different groups. I know that I've been involved in this, the lawsuit's been 5 years old, but we started working on this even before that. I have my ideas, but they're not set in stone. We need to hear from other people. And actually, my ideas have actually evolved during these 7 years or so, as I've heard different concerns. Not because I didn't agree with them, but because I hadn't really thought about it, right? And one of the things that what came up and was brought up was, what happens when you start integrating and schools start changing and teachers of color start getting displaced, right? And we've worked hard to create spaces for, and because we want to have teachers of color, right? What happens if like in the whiter districts they don't hire our teachers? Well, you know what? That has to be part of our remedy. We need to make sure that is something that we've thought through and that we've actually included in the remedy, and saying that this is something that has to be accounted for, right? So again, I don't know what I don't know. So any group that's out there who has ideas that have not been brought up so far, please bring it to us. And don't be mad that we haven't incorporated your idea yet. We haven't heard it, right? So if you're hearing what we're thinking, it's because this is what we've come up with so far, but we want to hear from you. So please bring it, because we want to make sure that we're getting that over to, that we have time to hear your ideas, process it and get it over to the attorney so they can then bring it to the table.
Can I just quickly just jump on what my friend Chris just said about not hollowing out the urban districts? Let me be clear about this whole process. This cannot be a process that's dictated by a bunch of old white guys to the communities of this state. Christian is our client. When he says he's not going to allow hollowing out to happen, we take that seriously. But beyond that, of course, this is going to be a failed process if we don't take that kind of thing into account. At the end of the day, we need the support of the whole state, and particularly of affected communities. And if we start, and I said this a little bit earlier, but if we start subtracting funding, because funding follows students or for whatever reason from the urban districts, that will not be a successful litigation. That will be a failed litigation. We need to succeed here. And in order to succeed here, we need to make our urban districts stronger, our suburban districts more diverse, our urban districts more diverse too. As Bob said, diversity is itself a benefit. In a world that is increasingly diverse. That's what we should be teaching our children. The educational scholarship on this is unanimous, that a diverse education is a better education. It's a thorough and efficient education. It's a required education in our state. But it cannot be that by doing this, we weaken the foundations of our urban districts. And we are resolute about that. It's something that will absolutely be discussed in the mediation process. I can't tell you that we have a set agenda for that process as to when that will happen, but we understand that concern and hear you all loud and clear on that.
I've also shared my perspective, I think, with the attorneys as a ELC steward, that I think we're all clear that the land remedies should complement and not compete with base funding goals and ensuring equity and adequacy in schools, particularly for the underserved school districts. So that much I think is clear as a principle moving forward. And we'll have to examine sort of the ways that district per pupil funding works as with regard to these programs, to ensure that it's sort of that do no harm based principle that gets carried out as we implement deseg and integration programs for the benefit of students, that districts are not that districts don't there aren't unintended consequences on districts in terms of funding and in terms of resources for students. So I think that will be a keen concern going forward.
Sorry, Bob.
Vivian had her hand raised.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say that for other groups and organizations that want to participate, and you can hold a convening and, can coordinate up with us. We'll have people come. So I think that'd be great if you're willing to convene groups in different portions of the state. I think we can help bring folks to that group that can share information about the litigation and take that information back from your groups. I think we're all challenged in terms of outreach and convening groups, but if you have a group, any group, I'm sure we can arrange to get on the road and go bring the information to the group. That would be helpful to us.
Thank you, Vivian. Tom?
I just wanted to add that I think it's very crucial that the lawyers have regular scheduled meetings with the plaintiffs so that we know what's going on and can provide some information in regards to the process.
Thank you. Are there any other remarks on that question? Okay. So Vandine, if it's okay, I've been instructed to close. All right. So first I want to thank everyone that is here tonight, the over 100 people who attended. Hopefully that means that this message and this call to action will carry on and on as the weeks go by. Thank you to Justice Stein, the attorneys, Latino Action Network, Cornwall Center, Education Law Center, Urban League, NAACP, Our Children, Our Schools. I have SEG here. I don't know what that means, but SEG. And I have jotted down a few next steps that we've taken from this conversation. One is Attorney Stein reminded us that justice is slow, but Vivian Frazier let us know that this is the fight of our time. And that hit me very deeply, that what if we could get this right in our time? And so what does that mean? More conversations, a plan for community input to be developed, and also community awareness, because a lot of the folks that we're talking about don't necessarily know that this is happening in our state. So definitely more community conversations. Tom mentioned quite a few times advocates coming together, talking to the lawyers to make sure that our voices are at the table. Charles Boyer mentioned having hearings across the state, and Christian even talked about the state funding those hearings as a part of the remedies. We need to organize, continue to follow the Cornwall Center that brought us together today, in the Statewide Equity Group. That's SEG, Statewide Equity Group. Yes, thank you all for convening us. The NAACP, Latino Action Network, the Urban League, Our Children, Our Schools. Continue to follow these organizations and stay informed. I think that's the best thing that we can do right now. And when the call comes for community input, that we show up and we give our truth and we say the things that are uncomfortable, but that will keep us from making the wrong decisions as we go down this path. So are there any other next steps that were missed? All right. And I will respectfully hand it over to Dr. Payne to send us off.
I can't. What I just want to underscore, I'm not sure that you repeated the point that Vivian made earlier, that a website is going to be set up. It'll probably be on the New Jersey. Do that for me, Justice Stein. Are you still here? Vivian,
Yeah.
New Jersey?
The New Jersey Coalition for Diverse and Inclusive Schools.
Okay. So on that website,
yeah. And we'll email the link out to everybody that participated today once the page gets set up.
And so that'll give us another ongoing means of communication and developing ideas. I will say that what Cornwall can do, we got 3 months to work with. As ideas and remedies are floating in the air, we can call together the researchers around the country who know something about those ideas. So if we're talking about bilingual education, we can find the people who are really strong on that. And we can get some of that information into this conversation. I'm really thinking we need like a day sometime in February or March where we just take our time and walk through some of the research on the big ideas. I think a lot of folk are going to feel after this conversation, we need something that's less hurried than a webinar, right? That's actual face-to-face, back and forth conversation over time. And so some of us will come together and think about how that will be structured. But what I also want to say, that this meeting came together over the Christmas holiday. We had like 130 people registered and 110 online at one time, right? I mean, that's just remarkable. And it says something about the concern among us for the children of the state. And then I'm going to simply close, thanking again all the organizations that took part. But I do want to say, Justice Stein has played a special role in this state over many, many decades, standing up for educational equity. So it's not a matter whether we agree or disagree on one thing or another. He's tried to keep that idea alive and to keep pushing for it. So I just want to say big respect for Justice Stein, and we'll all be coming back together. All right, so just thank everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Here.
Have a good night, Charles.
I'm trying to do my best.